Tonight, we'll be talking about what exactly socialism is. Just a quick overview here. There are 9 slides in this presentation explaining socialism, some misconceptions and the truth, and why it's not only important but necessary in our current time with the help of the three readings. So, without further ado, let's dive right in. Starting off by just asking, what do most people, generally speaking, tend to think of when they hear the word socialism? Well, it's not very positive, and that's putting it mildly. This is due to a lot of reasons. Firstly, decades of red scares and propaganda designed to dissuade people from thinking that it's a good system of governance or something that can bring about real change. A popular meme answer is when the government does stuff. But to get more serious, government control is something that is popularly perceived as socialism. Then there's the idea that socialism takes away freedom or that there's no such thing as individual thought or free will in a true socialist society. And also because, or no, that's skipping ahead. This is because of the existence of states, both gone and still around, that claim to be socialist states, but are in reality totalitarian state capitalist regimes. And also just because of some particularly pervasive and awful books written by certain authors. All this and more combines to paint socialism as this terrible, horrible, no good, very bad thing that has never worked and should be left to the dustbin of history. The Why the Working Class article addresses this outright, quote, especially in this country where the socialist movement has always been relatively weak, the most popular anti-socialist notions are most often founded on misinformation about what socialists believe, because their voices have not been loudly heard, end quote. But this is changing. Slowly, the public understanding of socialism is starting to turn around thanks to people who have actually read the books about these things and know what they're talking about. So, in order to set the record straight and utterly destroy the most popular myths about socialist ideology, let's just straight up ask the question, what is socialism really? Socialism is a lot of different things depending on who you ask. Whether revolutionary or reformist, and whether Marxist or utopian, it is and always has been of many different shapes. One of the main characteristics of socialism is, of course, the collective ownership of the means of production. While it may either be introduced gradually over time or more immediately in the case of a revolution, it's one of its stated goals, as the ideology believes that it is necessary to create a juster, fairer society built for the many instead of for the few. Also, extremely important to socialism and often forgotten or ignored is the establishment of workplace democracy, giving the worker a say in how their business operates. And it is often coupled with a greater than usual emphasis on political democracy, whether it be electoral or Soviet. As we'll come to see, however, the revolutionary way is really the only way to go, especially considering the conditions of our world today. So in order to understand why socialism is necessary now, we need to talk about the United States of America and the capitalist model it champions. According to Wikipedia, the American dream is, quote, the national ethos of the United States of America, a set of ideals including representative democracy, rights, liberty, and equality, in which freedom is interpreted as the opportunity for individual prosperity and success, as well as a chance for upward social mobility for each according to ability and achievement through hard work in a capitalist society with many challenges but few formal borders. End quote. This idea is and has continually proven to be completely and utter nonsense. The United States of America has a long and proud history of being oppressive, corrupt, and unequal, and is the perfect approximation of what the capitalist system is built to really do. Comrade Steve writes in his essay, The Secret of Socialism, quote, capitalism rests fundamentally on exploitation and cannot exist without it. However, it also relies on oppression of all workers. Workers in general are oppressed. They are told what to do by their exploiters and their agents the whole workday. They are denied the right to democratically control their work lives. Their choices as consumers are limited by the capitalist need for profit. They are alienated from their work lives and from each other. Capitalism sees people as a means to an end and treats people as such. This then spreads over to alienated human relations throughout society. Besides this, workers who are specially oppressed, women, racial minorities, immigrants, LGBTQ workers, etc., are treated as less than full human beings based on those characteristics. All told, a vast majority of workers are specially oppressed, end quote. The USA is built on this oppression. The working class, ordinary people like us, are at the mercy of the capitalist class and the corporations that fuel the capitalist machine. From the ISR article, quote, under normal conditions, U.S. corporations push for deregulation and free markets because this makes it easier to maximize their profits. Deregulation of the energy industry, for example, allowed Enron to make big profits by manipulating the supply of electricity until its sham accounting practices and bad bets brought it down. Likewise, the lack of government oversight let the mortgage industry and a shadow banking system create huge markets in securities trading based on subprime loans, which no investment bank or hedge fund could refuse to participate in if it wanted to keep pace with its rivals, end quote. All of this combines to create a deeply unequal system that must be changed. Now, some may retort with, okay, sure, the US is pretty bad, but it's nothing compared to the awfulness of the Soviet Union. It also exploited people for the benefit of the state, but it was socialist, and therefore it bad. To that, the question arises, what was what the Soviet Union had really socialism? Initially, it was. After the October Revolution and the establishment of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, they established a socialist economy and society. And for a time, things were pretty good. But crucially, a certain mustachioed man named Joseph Stalin took power after Lenin, who oversaw the creation of the council democracy that true socialism champions, died. Stalin then perverted the existing structure, took power away from the Council of Soviets, and bureaucratized the state, establishing state capitalism. In a state capitalist society like Stalin-era Soviet Union or modern-day China, another example, the state undertakes for-profit economic activities and the means of production are nationalized but not in control of the working class. Comrade Steve writes in The Secret of Socialism, quote, in the so-called socialist and communist societies, a new ruling class exploited the workers in order to compete with other capitalist states. They built military power and developed the economy to accumulate to have the basis for a strong military. Stalin started this process by leading a counter-revolution against the Russian workers' state in the 1920s. The later communist societies were all modeled on Stalin's. In all these states, not only exploitation, but oppression as well returned, end quote. This is important, maybe the most important thing to understand when we're talking about building a socialist society. Real socialism, Marxian socialism, is all about democratic control of the means of production through a council system much like that of Lenin's Soviet Union. Stalinism is not real socialism. Now, state intervention in and of itself is not a bad thing, especially when it involves enacting socialist reforms. When we look at the times that the U.S. government has intervened in economic crises, we can see that they have done this. As the ISR article quotes from another article, you can be a little socialist, and thank goodness this country always has been. Otherwise, we wouldn't have public schools and universities, public highways, Social Security, or Medicare. And thank goodness the public resisted President Bush's plans to hand Social Security over to the very financial titans who made out like bandits while crashing the economy. Or the years after World War II, when a little socialism built state universities and provided GIs with education benefits that created a good life for the American middle class. Think back to the Roosevelt years, when a little socialism pulled this country out of the depths of economic depression and put people to work building parks, roads, bridges, and public buildings, end quote. So we can clearly see that even in the US of A, the supposed unbreakable bastion of capitalist power, that it is not immune to the crises that capitalism by its own design creates, and that only through state intervention using socialist policies can these major crises be averted. So that's it, right? The government just needs to slap the bandage of small socialist policies onto the broken capitalist system, and then presto changeo, we're all good, nothing to worry about, business as usual. No. Crucially, this is not enough. Frederick Engels writes in Socialism, Utopia and Scientific, quote, the modern state, no matter what its form, is essentially a capitalist machine. The state of the capitalist, the ideal personification of the total national capital. The more it proceeds to the taking over of productive forces, the more does it actually become the national capitalist, the more citizens it does exploit. The workers remain wage workers, proletarians. The capitalist relation is not done away with. It is rather brought to a head. But brought to a head, it topples over. State ownership of the productive forces is not the solution of the conflict, but concealed within it are the technical conditions that form the elements of that solution. In other words, the modern state as it stands is fully capitalist, and no amount of injecting small amounts of socialist policies will fix the inherent and irreconcilable problems in the capitalist model that continually lead to the major economic crises we've seen over and over again throughout its existence, from the Great Depression to the Great Recession to even more. Okay, so state intervention, while helpful, isn't the full solution. So what is? Fully shedding the capitalist model and adopting the socialist model. Depending on the strain of socialism that one adheres to, the transition can be either revolutionary or reformist. Capitalism maintains its power through cultural, political, and economic hegemony. Transitioning to socialism involves challenging and ultimately dismantling these structures, these structures of dominance through education, cultural activism, and political organizing. Transitioning from capitalism to socialism is not a linear process and will inevitably involve contradictions and tensions. These may include conflicts between short-term reforms and long-term revolutionary goals, as well as challenges in balancing the need for immediate improvements with the broader vision of a socialist society. Capitalism is a global system, and the transition to socialism must be an international endeavor. Building solidarity with socialist movements around the world and challenging imperialism and global capitalism are essential components of this transition. This is why aligning ourselves with, for instance, the Palestinian movement is so necessary. They are victims of a colonialist regime backed by a capitalist regime, and so their struggle is our struggle. It intersects. So why can't we just vote socialists into power and gradually transition slowly and easily? Why does it have to be revolution? Well, electoral politics are heavily influenced by corporate money and interests, especially in the USA. Wealthy individuals and corporations can use their financial resources to influence elections, lobby politicians, and shape public policy in their favor. This results in a political system that prioritizes the needs of the wealthy elite over those of the working class. Not to mention the political ratchet effect prevents real change to more or left policies, the policies we need, and traps the liberal Democratic Party into, slowly caving to conservative and right-wing policies more and more. Again. Then there's just voting for the right candidate, quote unquote. In the capitalist system, there is no right candidate. There is only the lesser of two evils. That's not a choice or an option at all when the lesser of two evils is still fundamentally devoted to maintaining the evil, flawed capitalist system. Outliers and third-party candidates are equally useless, from just getting their foot in the door in the first place to seeing them abandon the genuinely good ideals they may be fighting for to become part of the system. We don't even need to look back too far to see progressives who championing change and socialist ideas as part of their agenda drop them and align with the capitalist class. Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, two politicians who in some way helped catapult socialism back into the mainstream consciousness, are the two biggest examples, having been doing things from breaking strikes to siding with the colonial Israeli regime. They have fully divested from the policies that they championed, policies that got them into the positions they have now, and they will not be the last. The exploitative two-party capitalist system that America depends on is uncrackable by those who wish to enact real change through socialism. And as established, socialism is necessary for all of us to not just build a new society, but to survive the times we're in now and the problems of our era. So what do we do? The contradictions are sharpening. The writing on the wall is more visible than it's ever been. What? Organization, education, full-on mass militant revolution. As Karl Marx and Frederick Engels put it in the Communist Manifesto, quote, "The first step in the revolution by the working class is to raise the proletariat to the position of ruling class to win the battle of democracy. The proletariat will use its political supremacy to wrest, by degree, all capital from the bourgeoisie, to centralize all instruments of production in the hands of the state, i.e., of the proletariat organized as the ruling class, and to increase the total productive forces as rapidly as possible," end quote. We have the biggest challenge of all. The battle of democracy is not the battle of elections between the elephant man against the donkey man, but class warfare of the proletariat against the bourgeoisie. To seize the means of production and to build a new society ourselves, it has to be us, as the socialist worker article states, quote, no other class has its hands so closely on the basic work without which the system grinds to a halt. Not a wheel can turn without them. No other class can precipitate a social crisis by the deliberate decision of its organized cadres, as in a large-scale strike. When the working class goes into battle, all of society is embroiled, for all depends on it. Every time the working class stirs, the rest of society quivers. End quote. We need to learn about this stuff. We need to gather in groups like this one. We have to stand up, work together, and take to the streets to fight for a better world. The world is getting worse. Poverty, inequality, hatred, greed, ecological collapse, genocide, war, these are all things that are happening right now as we speak, and they all have the same cause, capitalism. Capitalism is speed running the extinction of humanity, and the only option is to replace it with something better by any means necessary. Socialism is that alternative, thus something better. The society that we need to build the society we need to build is one that is not focused on profits or supremacy, but progress and fellowship. Things may seem unchangeable now, but things have always seemed unchangeable until they did change. The October Revolution succeeded in overthrowing one of the most powerful monarchies in the world, and though their socialist experiment was corrupted later on, for a brief, shining moment, they succeeded in showing us the blueprint for a new world. That blueprint is in our hands now, and for the sake of all humanity, we must consider using it. TLDR, fuck it, we ball, workers of the world unite, revolution in our lifetime.